This section of Cat o' Nine Tails is somewhat different from the others. It's called Patrick Galvin Remembered. Sometime around 1970, I heard Sean Lucy speak about a London-based Cork poet, Paddy Galvin, and heard Sean read aloud that great poem, The Kings Are Out. The effect was, if you'll pardon the expression, galvanic. At that time, the Irish poetry scene was dominated by the cooler, reflective voices of Tom Kinsella, John Montague, Richard Murphy, and the emergent Seamus Heaney. So it was striking to hear someone as influential and inspiring as Sean Lucy talk so passionately about this completely different writer, a writer whose vision and tone were so startlingly original. Sean included Paddy's work in his collection, Five Irish Poets, which came out shortly after that. Later, at a launch of Woodburners, I heard Paddy read his own work and realised that while his city was the city I had grown up in, the streets and the accents were completely familiar. His vision transformed that familiarity and rendered it into a vivid, fiery technicolor. Now, one of the other things that set Paddy apart was the poverty and hardship he had overcome. It's everywhere in the Raggy Boy trilogy, and yet he was able to write about it with wit and humour as well as anger. He left school at 12, made money by singing in bars and working as a messenger boy, and experienced firsthand the brutality of life in an Irish industrial school at Dangan. Later, prompted by anti-fascist fervour, he went north, and at the age of 16, with the help of a forged birth cert, he joined the RAF. He saw action in the RAF Bomber Command in Europe and North Africa while he was still a teenager, during the last years of the Second World War, and witnessed the appalling devastation of post-war Europe. This experience and his subsequent travels in Europe certainly added to the political passion of his work, but also gave him a kind of cosmopolitan freedom and extravagance of style. Yes, there are echoes of older Irish poetry and of Swift, but also of visionaries like William Blake and surrealists like Lorca and his contemporaries. At times, The Kings Are Out reads like Paddy Galvin's Guernica, a nightmarish carnival in which fascistic Catholic ritual collides with the auxiliaries burning Cork city centre. 50 years later, it still retains its capacity to move and to disturb, to seem familiar and disconcerting at the same time. After living in various parts of Europe, and a very successful period in Belfast as writer-in-residence at the Lyric Theatre, he returned to Cork in the 80s. This brought him into something of a golden period. He was elected to Éostána, and there was a long-delayed recognition of his work in his native city. The filming of his novel Song for a Raggy Boy and the Cork premiere of his play The Cage, championed by his old friend Dolores Mannion at the Cork Arts Theatre, were, it seemed, a kind of crowning glory to that period. The poet Billy Ramsell recalled attending a reading in the 90s. He says, "I still remember hearing Patrick Galvin read in the main rest in UCC. This would have been in 96 or 97. His was what could only be described as an electrifying performance, one that garnered him no small following among the many budding writers in attendance." Paddy gave his energy back to his city by establishing the Munster Literature Centre, which has become such an important engine for publishing work and for bringing on new writers. He became writer-in-residence in UCC, and he received a richly deserved honorary doctorate from the university. When he died in May 2011, his wife, Mary Johnson, saw to it that the funeral itself was like his last great work, bringing parts of the city grinding to a halt with its scale and splendour. Billy Ramsell says that for him, even apart from his writing, Paddy's quote, courage, generosity, and dedication had served as an exemplar for several preceding generations. He remains as a presiding spirit of Cork literature, one who seems destined to influence poets and writers still to come. This reading consists of 9 poems that reflect some of the range and variety in Paddy's work. From the nightmare vision of Prisoners of the Tower or The Kings Are Out to the understated simplicity of Roses for the President and the satire of Message to the Editor. Our thanks are due in particular to his children, Macdara and Groine, and to Dolores Mannion. Their support has encouraged us to celebrate his work and recall his special connection with the Cork Arts Theatre on this, the 10th anniversary of his death. Thank you for tuning in, and welcome to Patrick Galvin Remembered.
The wall stood in the village square, and no one knew who put it there, or why. It served no purpose, it belonged to no one, and it was built a mile away from the sea. You could measure our days by the wall. When a man died, we placed a stone on the wall. When a woman died, we placed 2 stones on the wall. And when a child died, we placed a small pebble on the wall, and you could see it, bleeding. You could measure our pain by the wall. Sometimes we drew faces on the wall. We carved our names on the wall. We drew small boats, large fish, storms at sea, and one man painted a lighthouse. You could measure the light by the wall. And if you stood close to the wall, you could hear the earth moving, and the stars burning, and the sun sinking slowly into a folding sea. You could measure the dark by the wall.
Patrick Street, in Grattan Street, in Ireland rising Liberty Street, the kings are out. Along the Mall, the Union Quay, in every street along the Lee, the kings are out. With knives of ice and dressed to kill, the wine flows down from Summer Hill. Christ be on your guard tonight, the kings are out. The snow is dark, and where they meet, the blood in rivers at their feet. Christ be on your guard tonight, the kings are out. Armies marching through the snow, banners burning row on row, hate upon them as they go, the stars are red. Parnell Bridge is falling down, Southgate Bridge is falling down, the City Hall is falling down, the stars are red. Christ be on your guard tonight, the kings are out. Walking through the fire and flame, Holy Father racked in pain, Corpus Christi in his hand, make way for the Lord. Murder, rape and sudden death, got your bloody onions yet? Pay the birds and never fret. Go home to God. Gaze upon this dreadful sight. Send an arrow through the night. Crush them to a bolt of hell. Make way for the Lord. Holy Father, mind your ways. You belong to other days. Now the kings write all the plays. Go home to God. Down the mall he walks in prayer, buildings burning everywhere, pushing Christ before the world. Make way for the Lord. And the kings with bone and knives tear away his 100 lives, throw his body in the lee. Go home to God. Kings and queens march on the town. Someone wears a royal crown. And the old ones in the street ring the dead bell of defeat. Reason bleeding through the snow. Nowhere else on earth to go. Mother of God, be our relief. Close the world on all our grief. Dance to a royal tune, down to a darkening moon. Under the rivers of frost, cry the believers. Deep in the silver ground, damned in the fire and sound, under the billows of ice, cry the believers. And the churches collapsed, and they opened the graves, and they moved in a wind through a fever of dead and a babel of bones. They raged at the lock, and they tore down the walls, and they danced on the pillars of blood and the arches of gold. They burned at the rock, and they staggered the root, and they struck at the wound and the cry in the dark cathedrals. They gouged out the eyes, and they murdered the lips, and they buried the tongue and the voice in the vile eclipses. And the city destroyed, and they ravaged the light, and they rode on a storm through an ocean of grief and a terror of ice. They stretched on the shores, and they raved at the stars, and they cursed at the roof of the world and the finger of God. Death by the skulls of night, dark by the fearful blight, under the falling skies cry the believers. Dead on the bitter glow, dust on the burning snow, under the galleys of hell cry the believers. In Patrick Street, in Grattan Street, the kings are out. The gallows high across the sky, the kings are out. Along the Mall, the Union Quay, in every street along the Lee, eternal night, the cinders white, the kings are out. The starving world has turned to stone, the kings are out. The queens alone lie bone to bone, the kings are out. And through the green and bitter hate, the cry of eagles at the gate. Christ be on your guard tonight, the kings are out.
In my day, we lived south of the city, in a house going cheap and due for demolition. In my day, it was pleasant to lie south of the city, and Miss Finch was 40 years old. Who was Miss Finch? I wish I knew. Her portrait hung upon the wall in this house going cheap and due for demolition. Her name printed underneath. Miss Cecily Finch. My house, bought and paid for in hard cash. Miss Cecily Finch had money in the bank. She lived in a house with a yellow face, the bathroom green, the stairs purple like a Roman mass. A country lass. And the dying roses in the hall proclaimed her taste. Miss Cecily Finch had found her place. When we moved in, we cleaned the rooms. We swept the roses from the petalled hall. We painted the stairs white, the bathroom red. Miss Finch was dead. Her portrait, heavy on the nail, we dragged it to the basement, locked the door on Miss Cecily Finch. A famine week, and Dublin at its greyest peak shed tears of anguish for Miss Cecily Finch, damp in the basement and crying to get out. I heard her shout, "This is my house, bought and paid for in hard cash." Miss Cecily Finch, ripe for demolition. We set her free, returned her portrait to the crumbling wall, saw green grow on the bathroom shelf, and purple covered the stairs. The dying roses in the street came back to greet Miss Cecily Finch.
Today is the feast day of St. Anne. Pray for me. I am the Mad Woman of Cork. Yesterday in Castle Street, I saw two goblins at my feet. I saw a horse without a head carrying the dead to the graveyard near Turner's Cross. I am the Mad Woman of Cork. No one talks to me. When I walk in the rain, the children throw stones at me. Old men persecute me, and women close their doors. When I die, believe me, they'll set me on fire. I'm the Mad Woman of Cork. I'm no saint. Sometimes, with an eagle in my brain, I can see a train crashing at the station. If I told people that, they'd choke me. Then where would I be? I'm the Mad Woman of Cork. The people hate me. When Canon Murphy died, I wept on his grave. That was 25 years ago. When I saw him just now in Dunbar Street, he had clay in his teeth. He blessed me. I'm the Mad Woman of Cork. The clergy pity me. I see death in the branches of a tree, birth in the feathers of a bird. To see a child with one eye or a woman buried in ice is the worst thing and cannot be imagined. I'm the Mad Woman of Cork. My mind fills me. I should like to be young, to dress up in silk and have 9 children. I'd like to have red lips. But I'm 80 years old. I have nothing but a small house with no windows. I'm the Mad Woman of Cork. Go away from me. And if I die now, don't touch me. I want to sail in a long boat from here to Roach's Point. And there I will anoint the sea with oil of alabaster. I'm the Mad Woman of Cork. And today is the feast day of St. Anne. Feed me.
With my little red knife, I met my love. With my little red knife, I courted. And she stole me to her deep down bed, her hair spread out a burning red. But never a single word was said about my little red knife. With my little red knife, I held her down. With my little red knife, I kissed her. And there in the deep of her 2 blue eyes, I kissed and kissed 1,000 lies, and opened wide her golden thighs to please my little red knife. With my little red knife, I made her weep. With my little red knife, I loved her. And the wine was heavy in her mouth. The morning air stood up to shout. But there wasn't a living soul about to see my little red knife. With my little red knife, I raised her up. With my little red knife, I ripped her. And there in the gloom and rolling night, I cut her throat by candlelight, and hurried home to my waiting wife, who damned my little red knife.
Spring. My father, against the victories of age, would not concede defeat. He dyed his hair, and when my mother called, he said he wasn't there. My mother too fought back against the years, but in her Sunday prayers apologised to God. My father said there was no God and that one knows it to her painted toes. My mother smiled. She plucked her eyebrows too, and wore a see-through skirt with matching vest. He likes French knickers best, she said. I'll have 'em blessed. My father raged. He liked his women young, he said, and not half dead. He bought a second-hand guitar he couldn't play, and sang the only song they knew. Plaisir d'amour. Summer. When summer came, my father left the house. He tied a ribbon in his hair and wore a caftan dress. My mother watched him walking down the street. He'll break his neck in that, she said. As if I care. He toured the world and met a guru in Tibet. I've slept with women too, he said, and they not half my age. My mother threw his letter in the fire. The lying git. He couldn't climb the stairs with all his years. She burned her bra and wrote with lipstick on a card, I've got 2 sailors in the house from Martinique. They've got your children's eyes. My father didn't wait to answer that. He came back home and sitting by the fire, he said he'd lied. He'd never slept with anyone but her. My mother said she'd never lied herself. She'd thrown the sailors out an hour before he came. My father's heart would never be the same. Plaisir d'amour. Autumn. Through autumn days my father felt the leaves burning in the corners of his mind. My mother, who was younger by a year, looked young and fair. The sailors from the port of Martinique had kissed her cheek. He searched the house, and hidden in a trunk behind the bed, my father found his second-hand guitar. He found her see-through skirt with matching vest. You wore French knickers once, he said. I liked them best. I gave them all away, my mother cried, to sailors and to captains of the sea. I'm not half dead. I'm fit for any bed, including yours. She wore a sailor's cap and danced around the room, while father strummed his second-hand guitar. He made the bed. He wore his caftan dress, a ribbon in his hair. I'll play it one more time, he said, and you can sing. She sang, the only song they knew, Plaisir d'amour. Winter. At 64, my mother died. At 65, my father. Comment from a neighbour who was there. They'd pass for 20. Plaisir d'amour.
You may recall, Mr. President, the incident in the square. Perhaps you would tell us about that. When I die, the President declared, lay me out in the garden so that I may taste the roses. I have always been partial to roses, and once knew a girl who wore nothing else. I've forgotten her name, and I have no memory for faces, but I do remember the roses. As to the incident in the square, which you have mentioned many times, I have no recollection of that. It was probably raining, and people protest largely because of the vagaries in the weather. The roses smelled sweet. I remember that. And she was remarkably tall. Of course, that particular incident may not have taken place at all. Have you considered that? So many things are illusory. The keening of snow, the endless dreamings of the heart. She lay face down in the rain. The roses covered her. I remember that.
I can see them now, prisoners of the tower, their faces blind from centuries of barbed wire. If you are guilty, you know you are guilty. If you are innocent, you would not be here. You are here, therefore. When the cell door closes behind you, you are free. When the cell door closes behind you, you are free. When the cell door closes behind you, you are free to weep endlessly without tears. It is no offence to shed tears in the tower. It is no offence to grow old in the tower. It is no offence to sit in the tower, but you may walk freely from wall to wall and contemplate the absence of bread. Under our system of government, a man has these rights. You may walk freely from wall to wall
and contemplate the absence of bread. You may not hear voices. All prisoners who hear voices will report such voices to the keeper of the tower. These voices do not exist, and if they do exist, they will be shot. The shooting of voices is essential to the harmony of the tower. All prisoners who fail to report the hearing of voices will be shot. All prisoners who report the hearing of voices will be sent to a lunatic asylum. Prisoners who are sent to a lunatic asylum may lose the freedom of the tower, but the voices will stop. Under the system of government, a man has these rights. You may lose the freedom of the tower, but the voices will stop. You are free to die. All prisoners are entitled to death. All prisoners are entitled to a speedy death. Any prisoner who is not capable of committing suicide will be shot. Any prisoner who fails to report a desire to commit suicide will be shot. When a prisoner dies in his cell, his body will remain in his cell. It is an offence to remove the dead from their cells. It is assumed that in due time, nature will corrupt the flesh, but the bones, if any, will remain the sole property of the prisoners. He may return for these bones at any time. Under the system of government, your dead also have rights. You may return for these bones at any time. You are free to have them.
Message to the editor. Sir, the Lord forgive the people of this town because I can't. When I dropped dead in the street 3 weeks ago, I thought they'd bury me in style. A state funeral was the least of it, with heads of government and nobility in attendance. I even looked forward to the funeral oration in Irish, with a few words of my past achievements. Our greatest poet, a seat in heaven to the man, and how I deserved better. But did I get it? My corpse lay in Baggot Street for a fortnight before anyone noticed it. And when I was finally removed to the mortuary, I was abused by a medical student who couldn't open a bag of chips, let alone the body of your greatest poet. Then, to add to the indignity, I was pushed into an icebox, and some clout stuck a label on my foot saying, "Unknown bard, probably foreign." If it wasn't for a drunken Corkman who thought I was his dead brother, I'd still be lying there unclaimed. At least that man had the decency to bury me. Where am I? Boxed in some common graveyard, surrounded by peasants and people of no background. When I think of the poems I wrote and the great prophecies I made, I could choke. I can't write now, because the coffin is too narrow and there's no light. I'm trying to send this through a medium, but you know what they're like. Table-tapping bastards reeking of ectoplasm. If you manage to receive this, I'd be glad if you print it. There's no point in asking you to send me a copy. I don't even know my address.